Welcome back, class, to part 2 of Unit 6. We are now going to be discussing the Great Depression again, and now we're going to be moving more into the New Deal. Starting off where we left off, we're going to be discussing the election of 1928. The election of 1928, we had the winner was Herbert Hoover. He was a businessman, to say the least. He supported business in most causes, and he supported prohibition. Hoover was a Republican. He was the last of the strand of the Republican presidents. Remember, first we had Hoover, then we had Coleridge, first we had Harding, then we had Coleridge, now we have Hoover. He's the last of the Republican presidents. In 1928, his Republican slogan was he wanted a chicken in every pot and a car in every garage. So he was definitely pro-business. The Hoover administration, this was once he was elected, he realized that the economy obviously was not having another kind of periodic temporary readjustments. This was the question of how do we start providing relief and help for the unemployed. This is right before, if you think, this is 1928, right before we have the stock market crash. So we already have the investments are being made. The banking issues are starting to really come to light. The buying on credit, the buying on installment, all these things are pushed into the economy and or outsourcing it like that. So suddenly, if you look at bullet point 2, he warned that suddenly there was a breakout of work for American. This was where he saw confidence in the American future, and he believed that people just needed to relax, and this was a business move. Businesses were going to trickle up and down like this. Eventually, though, as we know, the stock market does indeed crash, and the depression is starting to go on this downward spiral. Throughout the entire country, many people they're homeless. They've lost their homes, or they've lost nearly everything that they have, or whatever they do have. Most likely, they just carry it in a suitcase from town to town, or in search of any kind of job. Things like soup kitchens were being brought up by the government. We have bread lines. This is where you really start to see the word hobo come about. These were known as Americans who would wander around the country, walking, hitchhiking, or riding the rails. Basically, these were mostly your young boys or young men who were just in search of work, going from town to town, place to place, in search of any kind of anything. If you want to think of something, this is like Seabiscuit, the movie where the family sends the boy off to somewhere where he can actually succeed in, and then the money is in hope of sending it home. Many people become evicted from their homes. They're placed on the streets. This is a picture of a mother and her 2 children. This is a time where it wasn't just a depressed economy, it was a depressed personal life. Women, they were unable to provide for their children. Men weren't able to provide for their families. Children weren't able to have that happy sense of no worries, because most of them, if ever over the age of around 7, were already somewhat scoundering for food, scoundering for work, looking to do anything. Most of the time, homeless would build shacks of tar paper, scrap material. These would be known as shanty towns. Also, these mostly become known as Hooverville if they were in a cluster group together. It was said they called them those because they wanted to name it after President Hoover, who they believe placed them there, because he was a president all about pro-business, and his hope was if he put some emphasis on the businesses to get them back on their feet, that it would have a trickle-down effect. Some of the poverty strains in society, if you look, the impact of health. Many people either died or became severely ill due to starvation. Children were longing the suffering effect from poor diets and inadequate medical care. it put a huge strain on families. The living conditions declined of the families, crowded in small housing. Most likely, you would have people even who grandparents, aunts, uncles move back, and these families would join to it all together and kind of try to survive on that sense too. Also, men soon became feeling failures. They believed they couldn't provide for their families. Working women were accustomed to taking jobs far away from their men, so the family life completely starts to transform into either completely separated or nearly all together but with nothing. Um, Also, I want you to think back, just we have discrimination. We've talked about this many times periodically. We talked about, when the Great Migration happened, African Americans, they moved north. Then those soldiers came home, creating more of a rift between people. Now we're looking again as the discrimination increases as the African Americans started taking jobs again away from the white families. But lynching increases, and we start having this another rift of segregation starts burning on again. If you look at this picture, it's basically in the background, you'll see if you'll pause this video and really take kind of some good notes over it, it will definitely help you. But in the background, you see the house that these children and this mother lives in. It's resembling of a Hooverville. This is an overview of kind of what the Hoovervilles would look like. It's nothing more than a bunch of little small shacks placed together under one roof or one little location. And this is a picture inside of a home. If you'll notice, even their clothes, there's holes. They don't fit. There are no shoes on any of their feet. I mean, it's very, very poverty-stricken. And now, and then something known as the Dust Bowl occurs. The Dust Bowl occurs in the mid-region of America's heartland, where wheat was a huge aspect, and where many different things started taking place. Besides the fact that farmers started selling their land and they're losing it through the Great Depression, they have also started to uproot the grasses that were naturally forming on the land, which, they would bring in, they tried to plant their wheat crops, but then a drought occurred leading to the dust storm. So going point by point, the result of 1932 drought in the Great Plains, compiled with the uprooting of the wild grasses from farmland, made the soil or formed the soil into dust within the American pastures without any rain, or without any irrigation for that matter. Winds began to rapidly soon whip through the heartland, and with this it brings up the dust, and suddenly we have this huge dust storms and wave of dust storm after storm that starts developing, and the effects can be seen from the Dakotas to Texas. Just kind of showing you how many storms actually occurred in 1934. There were about 22 reported storms, and then you see in 1937 there developed 72 storms that covered the area. If you'll take note of this map and kind of look at it, you'll see primarily right here is where the storms took place. However, due to the wind and the rain, you can see in the yellow, this is all the affected areas that the took place. Soon, many families who were affected within this area began to move out because this truly became looking like barren sand. It looked like a snowstorm had hit. Many people move west and they head to California. A lot of people actually left from Oklahoma into California, Texas to California. If you went up to the South Dakotas, these people either went more to Minnesota, Wisconsin, that area, but most likely anywhere along, I would say, from the Mississippi and Kansas, southern, they went reportedly to California. These people, these migrants, became known as Okies since they were mostly from Oklahoma. If you look at this picture, this is showing one of the houses and the homes, most likely more of like a Hooverville type place, but If you'll notice, it's at least 4 feet buried with sand, and you can kind of get a representation of what it looked like when the dust storm occurred. This is a picture of afar of going into a dust storm. The movement of the people from the Dust Bowl demographic areas, they moved to California. I want you to take note that this affected California too, because this forced them to have some creations of relief crisis in cities such as Los Angeles, where most people fled to, and they went over to Los Angeles and California. And when they left, I mean, they had nothing. So there had to be some form of aid and relief that was developed to help the population survive. Here's an example of some Oklahomans, some Okies, who are on their way to California. If you'll notice, I mean, they have their car packed down. And this is, it's not necessarily a humorous fact, because this is all they have. And if you'll think of your own home and think about having to take only your true belongings with you, and knowing everything else was basically going to be destroyed or you could not take with you, kind of what would you take? To escape the depression, many people, they turn to different realms, different forms of things to get their mind off of the depression itself. Hollywood was one of the biggest movements. Despite, yes, obviously there's the depression happened, everybody's sad, but you have to think, it wasn't just that. Certain places, certain areas within the country were still being able to thrive, and they were still being successful, and one of those places was Hollywood. This is where people would go, people would go watch these movies and these films, and they would watch them, and mostly it's recorded that they would want to watch these and almost have the sense of feeling rich, watching people who had everything, and kind of, for the brief time period, remove themselves from where they are into the shoes of a Hollywood actor or the character itself. They wanted this, reality life. These moviegoers, also people who were aspiring to be great actors, many of them moved to Hollywood for the fact that hopefully they would be seen and have this new form of life. There was also, great movies, and they enjoyed cartoons as well. Walt Disney. So we have Disney starting to come about during this time period, and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was produced in 1937. And this was a great cartoon that people would turn to, and kind of, they could laugh, the Seven Dwarfs and the few comic reliefs. As well, though, there were other films that were produced. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. This was a film that, it's funny and it's humorous, but at the same time it was reflecting things and issues that were going on within the country itself. And this is talking about Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Is discussing some of the economic, governmental factors that are taking place during the Depression, but it's brought to a sense in the form of more of a comic relief. Other productions were things such as Gone with the Wind. This was a 4-hour long, and it was known that the costumes were elaborate for the time period. And this is a movie that truly is said to depict this perfect Depression era and the epics of the time period. Another big turn in the source of escaping the Depression was the radio. And the radio was able to offer entertainment in ways that had never been truly, grasped before. This is the more personal level. There were daytime radio dramas, soap operas, westerns, comic, different things, and all these people were trying to do was escape the reality that was affecting them. FDR was probably the first president to truly become well known on the sense of the radio. He would have his fireside chats during the Depression where he would come into the homes of the people, and it was a more personal effect rather than just you hear them on the radio or you see them. Whenever he would talk to the radio programs, he would truly almost be as if he was sitting in your living room, in your chair, calming you down. And, there was a sense of community, finding common ground among the people that he was doing. For the next session, please continue on to part